Before we get started, I'd like to give some time for introductions. So first, I would like to introduce Miney Luther. Miney, if you could introduce yourself, I think you're on mute.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you very much for joining us this morning.
Thank you. And then next, I'd like to introduce Mohsen Nazemi.
Thanks, Jania. Good morning, everyone, and welcome to the virtual training webinar for emission inventory. I'm Mohsen Nazemi. I'm the division director for engineering division, and thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Okay, so to introduce myself, my name is Janya Lofgren. I'm a senior engineer here at the San Diego Air Pollution Control District, and I lead the Toxics and Emissions Inventory team. So today we are holding this public webinar to introduce the use of our emissions inventory system, which is known as EIS, and then as well as present on some of the changes for CTR reporting. So before we get started, we request that all questions are saved till the end of the presentation, and there will be time at that time to ask them. When there is time to ask questions, you can either ask the questions through the chat function in Teams, or you can raise your hand and we will allow you to unmute yourself and ask the question directly as well. So in the chat, I do see some questions about using your mic. So currently, all attendees are not allowed to use their mic. So before we get started, I would like to mention that we will have another webinar on March 7th at 2 p.m., which will include detailed instructions for the use of the EIS portal. So to register for the next webinar, that can be found on our website at the same location where you registered for this webinar. So for a quick agenda, first I will go over Rule 19.3 applicability, which is the district's emission inventory rule. Then the data year 2022 data request, which were sent out, then the reporting timeline. Then we will introduce the EIS portal and end with some resources that are available to you. That will be followed by a presentation from CARB about the recent CTR amendments. So we are expecting that the presentation to take about 30 minutes, and then the rest of the time will be left for questions. So as you noted, I think the webinar was 3 hours, which should be plenty of time to go over the presentation and then the questions afterwards. Okay, so who must report an emissions inventory? So first, I'll give a short summary of each program, including the inventory type and reporting frequency. If you have any questions about applicability or a specific inventory type, I suggest referring to each regulation directly. For example, the regulations created by the California Air Resources Board can be found on their website, and the links are given here in the presentation slide. So the first inventory is CARB's AB 2588 Hotspots program. So these inventories are required to report if they emit toxic air contaminants found in Appendix A of the Emission Inventory Criteria and Guidelines Regulation, also known as the EICG, and if they're above reporting thresholds. These facilities are required to be analyzed for health risk, and therefore their emission inventories are used to create prioritization scores. And if they're above the district thresholds, a health risk analysis or HRA may be required. The frequency for those inventories are every 4 years. The second inventory listed here is CARB's Criteria Pollutant and Toxic Emissions Reporting, or CTR regulation. Facilities must report to CTR if they are part of CARB's greenhouse gas mandatory reporting program, if they emit more than 250 tons per year of criteria emissions, or if the facility has one or more permits with the district, and they exceed the emission levels detailed in the regulation. So this is the regulation that was recently amended and is probably the reason most of you are attending today. So later on, CARB will give a more detailed presentation about CTR and their recent amendments. The third inventory listed here is for facilities which emit more than 250 tons per year of nitrogen oxides, known as NOx, or volatile organic compounds, known as VOC, which is a requirement of the Federal Clean Air Act of the Environmental Protection Agency, or EPA, and the frequency for that inventory is every year, it's annual. The next inventory listed is for facilities that emit more than 5 tons per year of NOx and or VOC, and that is per the district's rule 19.3, and that frequency is annual as well. And last but not least, facilities that are located in AB 617 communities and part of community emission reduction plans may be required to report emission inventories as well, and that frequency for those are as requested by the district. So within any given calendar year, a facility may be required to report to one or more of the programs listed. Received data request letters will cite the inventory type within the subject line of the letter, which I will show on our next slide. So here we have an example of a data request letter that may have been received by your facility. District staff have made best efforts to help identify facilities that are subject to CTR for 2022. The district has prepared a list of facilities which are required to report for data year 2022 reported in 2023. Some facilities may not be included on this list based on specific emissions or activity levels, which are not available to the district at this time to assess. So please note that this list is not encompassing of all facilities required to report, and if a facility is not listed, that does not mean it is exempt from reporting. Any facility with an active permit should complete their own applicability assessment to determine if reporting is required. So we mailed the list of facilities a 2022 data request letter, and it should have been received at some point over the last month. To date, the district has sent data request letters to roughly 2,300 facilities for data year 2022. If you did have a updated email address on file with the district, we also sent out an email to these facilities for those that need to report for data year 2022. If your facility did not receive a letter or an email and you believe you're subject to CTR, please contact us for a letter. So here's the schedule for our 2022 data year reporting. Like I mentioned on the last slide, the district has sent out data request letters starting in mid-January, and the portal launched on February 6th. If you received a data request letter before the portal launch on February 6th, then your emission inventory due date is 60 days from February 6th, which is April 7th, 2023. Otherwise, the due date for your emissions inventory is 60 days from the date listed on the letter that you received. Extensions are available by request, as seen in the letters that were sent, and approval, but approval is needed by the district and should not exceed May 1st for CTR facilities. So if you would like to request an extension, please email us. After emissions inventory data has been submitted from all the facilities, the district has till August 1st to calculate the emissions with that data and submit to CARB. So all data must be submitted through the EIS portal. EIS can be accessed in several different ways, including directly from our website or from the emails you've received directly from Lakes for registration of the EIS portal. The EIS webpage on our district website includes direct access to EIS, as well as additional resources, such as a recording of this training and previous trainings, like I mentioned. We have an FAQ on the website as well, and then soon we will have a guide for the EIS portal. This website will also hold future trainings and announcements for the March webinar as well. Okay, now I'd like to introduce Mike Johnson from Lakes to go over registration of the EIS portal.
Hello, everyone. My name is Mike Johnson. Some of you may have seen me on some help desk emails, and I wanted to just cover off some of the details with registering. You'll note that on the EIS webpage, there are 2 links at the bottom for requesting access and changing RO status. The request access is required for all accounts in 2022. We've had so many accounts that have gone defunct because of changes in roles that we are requiring all users to request a new authorization for 2022. This is to prevent people who have left their organization from still having access to environmental data that may continue to be sensitive for many of the permit holders and facilities, and we just wanted to make sure that we can close that down. If you have a change in your RO, you can also access the request RO link, enter your email and your EIF ID, which was on the letter or was in the email that was sent out from us, and you should be able to then change the RO through the request process. Next slide. A few other things to note about accounts for EIS. There is only 1 RO assigned per facility. Currently, you can request multiples, but you should maintain just a single responsible official. This is the general best practice set forward by the district. The RO is able to grant and access other users. So if you have a consultant or you have other team members that need to assist in preparing your inventory, they can go through the application process, again, from the front page of the portal, and you can approve their access. This is just to make sure that no one who's not supposed to have access to your environmental data that's held in the portal would have access without your permission. So we allowed this to be a self-serve system. If you need to update the RO, you can email both the district and us, and we will be glad to assist you in that process. Lastly, you can also take advantage of the request RO status, as I noted on the front page, and you can do the sign up and get the process started and get approval if you know you have an RO change. Lastly, the only persons who can submit the final inventory once it's completed is the RO account. So please make a note that you do need to be sure you have an RO account. You won't be able to submit without it. All right, back to you, Johnny.
Thanks, Mike. Okay, so as Mike detailed, once you have access to EIS, there are 2 ways to enter the required data. The first is through the EI questionnaire or data entry direct. These are 2 modules which you will see in the EIS portal. And although they have different formats, they are the same. Some formats are easier for facilities with larger inventories. The second way to upload data is to download the EIQ forms, complete them, and then upload them back into EIS, where they will auto-populate the data that was requested. I'll go over this a little more in another slide. Finally, after all the data has been submitted and uploaded into EIS, you'll need to run a QA/QC for the submitted data, and if there are any issues, resolve them. Once they're resolved, then you can submit the final report. The report can only be submitted by an RO, as Mike said, and it is very important to submit. Otherwise, the inventory will not be deemed complete. So the use of the EIQ forms is a great way to input a lot of data into the EIS portal at one time. Currently, the EIQ forms have been pre-rendered and are available for facilities to download. This is a little different than previous years, where the district provided EIQ forms by request for upload in EIS. So all EIQ forms can now be downloaded and uploaded in EIS and should not be requested from the district help desk. I'll point out a couple limitations for the use of these EIQ forms. So users cannot add or remove devices or choose different calculation methods in the EIQ forms themselves. If this is done, then the forms will not upload correctly. So if a user would like to add or remove devices or choose different calculation methods, it is recommended to do so in the data entry direct or the EI questionnaire after the EIQ forms have been uploaded. As the EIS portal expands, we do hope to introduce new capabilities such as mass downloading and uploading of EIQ forms through zip files and regeneration of forms to reflect adding and removing of devices and calculators, although this is currently not available at this time. Once data entry is completed in EIS, please continue to the emissions inventory submittal module to run a QA/QC of the report. The QA/QC will tell the user whether data is missing from the report or if a substance has been reported which does not match the district's. So after all of the issues have been resolved from the QA/QC run, save your report and continue to the submission. Again, only an RO can submit the final report. So what we've just gone over is a high-level overview of the use of the EIS portal. If you have any questions about using EIS, please refer to our website or contact us. And then our webinar in March will include more detailed instructions on the use of the EIS portal. There are a couple new requirements for data year 2022 that I will quickly go over. But if you have any questions about these requirements, please contact us directly. So the district rule 19.3 was amended to phase in the use of the EIS portal, with 2022 being the final year, and now electronic reporting and submission is required. As I mentioned earlier, there are also some amendments to CARB CTR regulation, which are included here. The first of which is additional applicability, new reporting requirements for almost all facilities with a district permit to operate or PTO. And those facilities are going to be phased into the program between now and year 2028. There are also new TACs to be reported and or quantified. We have roughly 700 new TACs, which will be phased into the CTR program. There's also a requirement for point source stack and location activity data, including height, diameter, flow rate, and temperature. And lastly, there's a requirement for reporting portable equipment, diesel engines greater than 50 horsepower. So we've adjusted our EIS system so the facilities can now report these CTR requirements, which I will go over next. So to account for the new data requirements, EIS has been adjusted to pre-populate every facility with new devices as placeholders for the reporting of TACs, the point source information, and portable equipment. Each inventory has been pre-populated with a site for reporting additional substances for quantification, specifically those that may exist or be generated at your facility and are listed in the CTR regulation table B2. Every site 0 has also been pre-populated with a device to report portable diesel engines greater than 50 horsepower. But reporting portable diesel engines at the site level is not required. You can aggregate that information and report under a single site. So one thing I would like to note is that if your facility does not have any of the pre-populated devices or data, you must acknowledge that they do not exist in the reporting year by choosing the 0 emissions function under options for each site or device that did not have the substances. This is something that is most commonly overlooked, and when you try to submit your report, it won't run the QA/QC or it will fail the QA/QC because the 0 emissions option hasn't been chosen. So I would also like to point out that all the calculation methods have been pre-selected for each device in EIS. If the district does not have a calculation method which fits the process, we suggest to choose one of the general methods, such as an emission factor procedure based on material usage or a mass balance procedure. The district, we will review all of the chosen calculation methods during our review. If you have any questions about the calculation methods, we have posted most of them for reference on our website. And if you have any questions about that specifically, please contact us directly. Okay, so I'd like to give you a couple links for support and resources. So for EIS technical support, which includes creating or modifying login information for EIS, designating an RO, or issues with uploading data, please contact eis.support@weblakes.com. So for district support, which includes questions related to permitted equipment, data to be submitted, and/or calculations, please contact APCD inventory at sdapcd.org. So this concludes the district portion of the presentation. Now I will hand it off to John Swanson at CARB for the CTR regulation.
Jania, before we go to CARB, I just want to, again, thank you for attending this. And I know there's a lot of information that Jania went through, but just want to give you some peace of mind that the March 7th webinar is going to help you a lot more in terms of using a EIS portal. And we're also going to be posting a FAQ list, which is very extensive, and it'll answer a lot of your questions as well, just as an FYI. Thank you.
Thanks, Mohsen.
Yeah, thanks, John, and thanks, Mohsen and Mike also. I just really wanted to extend our thanks from CARB to the district, and also thanks for all the attendees today for your interest in complying with this reporting program and some of these new reporting requirements. My name is John Swanson. I'm the manager of the section here at CARB that it has developed and is implementing the CTR regulation in collaboration with the districts at the district level, which again, it sort of expands upon existing stationary source emissions reporting programs, and sort of also combines the reporting programs that were existing into what we hope to be a uniform system for criteria pollutant and toxics reporting from stationary sources that we receive from the districts. And on the call also today, my manager, Mena Shah, and a few of my staff are also Daniel Sloat, Owen Gong, and some others on my staff that will help to answer questions. So I think I will just go ahead and go through our presentation. I'll try to keep this relatively brief, but there's a lot of information, and we're happy to answer additional questions on the history or the requirements of the program. So basically, what is CTR? It's the regulation for the reporting of criteria air pollutants and toxic air contaminants. And that is a statewide regulation that was developed here at CARB. CTR applies to specified facilities that have been issued a permit to operate by the local air district. If you do not have a permit to operate issued by the local air district, the CTR does not affect you. But if you do have permits, you will likely be required to report data to the district, and then the district provides that data to us at some point over the phase-in period that Janya mentioned. The regulation requires specified facilities that meet the criteria to provide emissions data or the activity data needed to calculate emissions, such as fuel used or the amount of material processed and so forth, and report this data to the local air district on a specified schedule and as directed by the district. After our phase-in period for CTR, it will eventually require annual criteria pollutant and toxic emissions to be reported and updated for virtually all permitted facilities in the state, with a few exceptions for very small and less impactful facilities. During the phase-in, certain facilities will need to report data to the district using the district's online reporting system. Next slide, please. So why was CTR developed? Basically, it was to meet the needs of several programs here at CARB on a statewide level, and to also have CARB comply with our obligation under recent legislation at the state level. So a more complete and disaggregated and updated stationary source emissions inventory is needed for several air quality programs here at CARB. A couple of these in particular, there was Assembly Bill 197, which, among other things, requires CARB to provide information to the public on our public website regarding criteria pollutant and toxic emissions from stationary sources at, quote, the sub-county level. So we will need more stationary source, more facility-specific emissions than what we currently collect. Under some existing programs, including the National Emissions Inventory for criteria pollutants, districts, many districts in California have aggregated the emissions from certain categories of facilities like gas stations and auto body shops, and have reported those emissions as an aggregated number. But some of this legislation and the CTR is requiring us to disaggregate those to the facility level, and that's one of the biggest impacts of the program. Doing this under AB 197 makes the data available to residents of heavily impacted communities as a transparency issue, and it also makes the data available to CARB programs, air districts, and the general public to identify and evaluate air quality issues, particularly at the community level. Then AB 617 required CARB and air districts working together to select communities that are disproportionately impacted by air pollution, and with community input and representation, develop plans to mitigate pollution and protect the public in those communities. That requires community level emissions from all sources, including mobile sources, which are often the driver of air quality issues, but also area-wide and stationary sources, which can present risk. And that includes smaller sources, which cumulatively can present risk, even if individually they're not impacting public health. The accumulation of emissions can be a source of risk. And AB 17 requires us to evaluate that and then develop plans to mitigate emissions and pollution in those communities. Next slide, please. Regarding who's subject to the requirements of CTR, there are two versions of CTR. The first version was approved in 2018 and applies to a smaller set of larger and more impactful facilities in California. There were three categories specifically identified in the statute, and that includes facilities that report GHG emissions directly to CARB through the mandatory reporting program for GHG emissions, 250 tons of criteria pollutants, that is facilities that are permitted to emit 250 tons or more of criteria pollutants in a non-attainment area, and then high priority facilities under the hotspots program that Janya mentioned earlier. That is about 1,500 facilities statewide. And by and large, those facilities were already part of a routine reporting program, either annual or quadrennial under existing programs, but CTR requires those facilities to report annually, both criteria pollutants and toxics. And then in 2020, the state board approved amendments to the CTR, which were aligned with amendments to the governing document for the hotspots program, which we call the EICG, or the Emissions Inventory Criteria and Guidelines. The hotspots program has been around for over 20 years, but it was long overdue for an update, including an update to the list of toxics that need to be evaluated and assessed for risk. So under the amendments, the three categories initially continue to report, but many other permitted facilities will be phased in. And across the state, districts had different policies based on local rules and permits and programs. And some districts reported more, some districts reported less, but the CTR is pretty comprehensive, and it will bring in a more consistent and more comprehensive inventory, but that does require work from the districts and attention from the facilities that are subject to the rule to provide data to the districts. We do have a gap year. Next year, we're taking a year with no new requirements from CTR to to assess how the first year of greatly expanded reporting has gone and what problems we might need to address. So 2022 emissions for San Diego, the facilities that are in the categories listed in phase 1 in the regulation are subject to the rule, and so that's why we're having this discussion today. Next slide, please. So the phase 1 facilities, it's just a list of categories of industrial sectors and activities. And if your facility meets any of those thresholds for being in a particular category, then the facility is subject to CTR, which means that you'll need to provide information to the district so they can quantify emissions and send those on to CARB. And a few of the categories that are included in phase 1 are any facility emitting over 4 tons of criteria pollutants or precursors, including particulate matter, volatile organic compounds, oxides of nitrogen, and carbon monoxide. However, the carbon monoxide threshold is actually 100 tons, not 4 tons. But for any other criteria pollutant, 4 tons is the threshold. As a couple of notes, for a couple of common categories, we don't expect you to automatically know what your emissions are if you haven't been part of a program, but to help out with that, we've noted that gas stations, which are actually in phase 2, but just so they wouldn't have to report if gasoline dispensing is the only permitted process that your facility has. You wouldn't need to report until phase 2, but if you're over 4 tons of VOC emissions, then you would need to report in phase 1, and that threshold is that occurs at about 9 million gallons. So if you're less than 9 million gallons, which most gas dispensing facilities are less than that, you'll be in phase 2 and not phase 1. But regardless, if the district asks you to provide data, please provide that data. Any district rules and policies actually will supersede the CTR. The CTR is the baseline. The same with auto body shops. Most auto body shops are below 4 tons of VOC emissions. So if the only permitted processes at your auto body shop is for paint booths and your only significant emissions under your permits are for VOCs, we know that 99% of auto body shops are below the threshold, the 4-ton threshold. But a lot of other categories will bring a lot of facilities in that may not have been reporting under prior years. And the biggest probably is facilities that have a permitted diesel-powered engine. If you have a permitted diesel-powered backup generator, you're in phase 1, and so you'll need to report through the portal. Also, there's a number of categories for solvent usage. Dry cleaners are also in phase 1. Plating facilities using cadmium or chromium, and then releases of fumigants for when post-harvest crops are fumigated, and then those gases are released. Those are also in phase 1. Who's not in phase 1? We mentioned the gas stations, paint booths. If your only permitted processes are natural gas combustion devices like a boiler, if you're less than 4 tons, then you come in later. You don't need to report. Crematories, sandblasting, char boilers. If you're less than 4 tons, you're not required to report unless the district asks you to report. Next slide, please. So if you're new to the process, and I guess everyone is because the district has the new system, but I think it's great. I think it'll help out a lot with efficiency and accuracy, and that will be great. How to report? Provide data to the district. So you won't be providing data directly to CARB for CTR or for any other reporting program. It's going to go through the district, and then you'll access that online reporting tool to provide the necessary information. These bullets under what to report, I would just refer and defer to Janya and Mohsen and the district staff. There will be data already in the system. This is where these bullets vary from district to district, so this is kind of a generic list, but please enter the data as directed by the tool or by the district. And just as an aside there, any questions, we'll provide some contact information. Any questions regarding applicability, whether or not if you haven't received a letter from the district and you think you may be subject to CTR, feel free to contact us. But any questions about how to report if you have received a letter, any questions about getting that information to the district, please contact the district staff. If we get those questions, we'll just direct them back to the district. Next slide, please. Some of this Janya also mentioned. What else is new for 2022 emissions reported this year in 2023? Janya mentioned the portable diesel-powered engines, and what CTR says specifically, and again, any policies or rules at the district level supersede what's, if it's more stringent, it supersedes the CTR. But what CTR says is if you're an MRR facility and you report greenhouse gases directly to CARB, or if you're a 250-ton emitter, if you're permitted to emit 250 tons or more, those are very large facilities. And at those facilities, a common source of emissions that has not always been in the inventory, but can be significant, is construction and turnarounds and maintenance where they use a lot of diesel engines. So portable engine use at those facilities, as Janya mentioned, is required, but we're flexible on the methodology. And in fact, you can report them. CTR allows reporting the emissions from those devices as a combined source. So you can report the emissions from all portables used on site. So if there's maintenance or construction, and contractors come on site and they're running engines, we want those emissions to be included in the inventory for the facility, but we are flexible on methodology for collecting and estimating those emissions. Best available data and methods is what the CTR says. Let's see, I'm just looking down the list here. And again, for the core facilities, as Janya mentioned, that is the first three categories: the MRR facilities, 250-ton facilities, and facilities that the district identifies as high priority under the hotspots program. CTR does require that stat parameter information, which is not just the location of the release point, but also the height, diameter, temperature, flow rate, and velocity. And that data is needed for air dispersion modeling, and that's basically the reason we're requesting that information also. Again, if you're directed to report that by the district, report it. But just to be clear, the CTR requirement is for those facilities in those first three categories to provide that information. The new toxic chemical list is also significant. So any of the new chemicals in table B2, as Janya mentioned, are subject to reporting for any facility that is required to report under CTR for a given year. We do have a provision where if a toxic substance is used or produced or present on site, but there is no feasible way to estimate the emissions, that is, there's no existing emission factor, the emissions cannot be quantified using a mass balance, or if there's just no way of, you have the chemical on site, but there's no way of knowing how much had been released to the atmosphere, we have a provision where the amount of the substance used or produced on site during the year can be reported. And we're working towards a better way of how to get that reported in the system as well. CTR also has a provision for what we call abbreviated reporting. it's actually very similar to the system that's been set up by the San Diego district. Basically, what that says is for some very common categories, such as emergency standby engines, the requirement under CTR is for the facility to just provide the throughput data or activity data that's necessary to quantify the emissions, and then the district quantifies emissions on the facility's behalf, just using that data. So that could be the amount of fuel used, or the hours of operation, or the amount of energy produced. As at the discretion of the district can choose those methodologies, those emission factors and pollutants, and quantify emissions on behalf of the facility. And in many cases, that's what districts do anyway. So it sounds like, most of what the reporting that San Diego does, they do that very broadly. But just to note that there are some categories of sources that are noted in the CTR as being abbreviated, so we don't expect the facilities to be calculating their own emissions for some of those very common sources. Next slide, please. So this is just our contact information here at the at CARB. There's my contact information. Owen is a new addition to our staff. He will be a lead on the CTR requirements and questions about that. Daniel Sloat is also a lead, and then we have our program website, and then also a website link there for guidance documents and FAQs. I think that's it. Thank you again.
Thank you, John. Okay, so I think that ends our portion of the presentation. We will keep it up in case we need to refer back to any part of the presentation when we have questions. And now we can start taking some questions. There are some in the chat, and if you would like to ask a question, please raise your hand, and we will give you the option to unmute yourself to ask that question.
Jania, there is a list of questions already in the chat. I don't know if you're able to look at them.
Yes, we will. I believe Dan of the district will be unmuting some individuals to ask questions, and then we will address the questions in the chat.
Okay, I can go ahead and do that. I'm going to go ahead and unmute Robert Streets. Give me one moment. Okay, Robert, you can go ahead and ask your question. Can you hear me?
Robert, you need to unmute yourself.
Yeah, be sure to unmute yourself first.
Okay, well, I can answer a couple questions while...
Should I move on to the next person? I allowed Mike, but he has to unmute himself. Let's try Paz Gomez. I'm going to go ahead and allow your mic if you can unmute yourself.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So I'm with the city of Carlsbad, which also includes the Carlsbad Municipal Water District. And I had gotten one of the emails that says sign up. I'm an RO, but it did not provide me the EFID, and we have numerous facilities. In the meantime, Charles Balteria, who's one of our program managers, had gotten a request and said that it needed to be approved by the RO, which would be me. And that email was forwarded to me, and I saw that there was an EFID. So that was what I was able to use to be able to log into that initial email that I received from Web Lakes, because there was no EFID that was provided at that email. And I was able to establish an account. However, when I went in there to look for that request from Charles Balteria to provide him access. In the start page, it said to go to the start page. There was nothing there. And so it wasn't clear what we would need to do, and also had some concerns because I did see the spreadsheet, the master list, I guess, of everything, sorted it by Carlsbad, and found that there were some facilities that were listed under different staff as the ROs, which is fine. But there was one that we noticed that, or at least that I noticed, that was for a person that no longer is with the city. And so who should we be coordinating with directly at APCD on making sure that the ROs actually did receive the emails and the notifications and things along those lines?
Yes, thank you for your question. Before I answer, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going, the list that you mentioned, I'm going to insert a link to that in our chat so the other listeners will know what you had referred to. So we have a list on our website of all of the facilities that we have sent data request letters to for 2022. As you had mentioned, you had a question about what your emissions inventory facility ID, acronymed as EIF ID, may be. The reason being is that when you register for EIS, you'll need a valid email address as well as the EIF ID. That can either be found on this list, which I just put in the chat, or in the right-hand corner of the data request letter that you received. After reviewing the data request letter, if you received it or this list and you still may not know what your EIF ID is, please reach out to us at apcdinventory@sdapcd.org. And we can look in our system based on your permit to operate and see what your EIF ID is. So that's how you can find out what your EIF ID is. Yeah. And then for registration under or changing the responsible official, as Mike mentioned earlier, there is on the login page of EIS, you can request access. You can also request a change of the RO. So please use that form to change the individual who's been associated with the RO on your account. Those ROs were assigned based off our permit system here at the district. We understand that those individuals may no longer be with the facility, so you can use that request RO change link to change the RO to the account.
So for something like the gentleman's name that was there for that EIF ID, we may not have received the letter, but we know that that person's not there. We can just go in there, just any one of us, to request a change in the RO, or?
Yes, yeah. So
Okay.
on the login page of EIS, anyone can request an RO. The current RO, though, if they are an active user, can also will accept or deny that request. So if it is someone that is no longer been at the facility, of course, they cannot accept it or deny it. But once a new RO has been approved, they can decline the RO status of the person that is no longer at the facility.
Okay. And then for those that have multiple EIF ID, do we need to initiate one for each of those EIF IDs so that there's multiple links, if you will, or access?
Mike, could you address that question?
Sure. If there's multiple EF IDs for a specific individual, and they were on the required to permit list, they already have all their EIFs under their accounts. So all they have to do is access it, either register with any one of the EF IDs under their name, and then it'll unlock all of them at one time. If you're concerned about any specific particular EIF IDs, just send an email to the help desk, to the Web Lakes help desk for EIS, and I'll be glad to help look them up and see what happens. And okay, for folks who have left your organization but are still listed as the EIF ID, when you do the request, it'll automatically upgrade you on the spot. So you don't have to wait for any kind of approval. It's only when, for example, if someone came to you who is an RO for a facility and wanted RO access, you would get an email saying this person has requested it, and you can approve or deny it. Actually, all you have, if you choose not to approve it, you just ignore the email and go about your business.
Right. So in that particular case, as I had mentioned with Charles, he had requested it and it should have come to me as the RO, but in my system, there wasn't anything in the start page. So should we just contact you directly and say, where is that request? Because it's not in mine.
Right, right. If now one thing to note is if they request RO before they've registered their account, it will say on the screen that you need to register first. And if they didn't go through a registration for at least one site, it may have gone nowhere. But yes, please, by all means, contact us, email us with the email IDs, and we can check the logs and we'll get you fixed up no matter what.
Yes, and as it's in this presentation, but we'll put it in the chat as well. If you're having any issues with registration, please contact Lakes at eis.support@weblakes.com.
Thank you.
Dan and Michelle, I think we should go to the chat. There's a lot of questions in the chat and then come back to the raised hands, please.
Okay, we can do that.
Okay, yeah, so I'm gonna roll back to the chat towards the very beginning here. Sorry, adjust my monitor. So this question from Lori. Lori, yes, it is being recorded. It'll be up on YouTube and on the district website. And second part of Lori's question, Janya, is can the PDF presentation be shared?
Yes, similar to last year's trainings, a PDF version of this PowerPoint will be posted to the website after the presentation.
Okay, great. So moving on to the next one. Okay, this question from Frank. Can you save data in the system without formally submitting?
Yes, so under both when you upload the forms, if you're using EIQ forms or if you're entering the data directly in Data Entry Direct, there is a button to push, which is save. And save all of the information it's recommended to save after you've entered anything. And at that point, you can leave the system and enter back at any time, and the information that you have saved before will still be there before you submit.
Yeah, actually, Johnny, as a follow-up to that, when you're entering data for equipment or process, you want to save that before you go to enter data for the next equipment. Is that also the case?
While it's not a requirement, it is suggested because the system, if you do log out and you weren't saving, then it will be lost. So it is recommended to save after you've entered data under a permit level.
Thank you.
I have a follow-on to that. Just remember that you can even save incomplete. So if you don't know something, still save. It'll come back and it'll still be in the incomplete state before you do your submittal. So you don't have to, if there's certain questions you need to answer, just save what you've got and continue on. It'll keep everything.
Okay, two questions from a person from Montrose Environmental. First one is, what is meant by no new reporting? And the second one is related to that. Is a CTR facility in phase 1 required to report data for the 2023 reporting year?
I believe CARB responded to this question in the chat. The no new reporting, I believe, was part of the CARB presentation. And I believe it was answered, but John, did you want to?
Yeah, the CTR requirements and the phase-in are a little bit complicated. And I did say no new reporting. So the phase 1 facilities in the San Diego district are required to report 2022 emissions in 2023, and and then the gap year is 2023 emissions year. And what we mean by that gap year is that the phase 2 and phase 3 facilities don't need to report until the 2024 and 2025 emissions year. It is at the discretion of the district whether or not phase 1 facilities need to update their emissions for 2023, 2024, and 2025. So essentially each phase phase of categories needs to report at least once during the phase-in. And then for San Diego and some other large districts, 2026 is the first year where 2026 emissions need to be reported in 2027 for all the facilities subject to CTR, and then annually after that. So if you're a phase 1 facility, you have a backup generator, you provide data to the district for your 2022 emissions estimate. Whether or not you report again updated data in 2023, 2024, and 2025 is at the discretion of the district. You'll be in compliance with CTR if you've provided that data for the 2022 emissions year, and then annually for 2026 and forward. Some districts have decided to, once a facility is in the program, they want them to continue to report annually, and that would supersede the minimum CTR requirement. So, Janya, do you want to follow up on that?
Basically, we align with what you've just said. And so if you've received a letter for phase 1 for 2022, you're required to report. And then the following years is the same in terms of if you've received the request or not.
Okay, good. Question from Andrea. Will the district's EIS tool be set up differently for facilities applicable for abbreviated reporting? In other words, without the stack parameter information?
Yeah. So unlike other districts, the San Diego online portal is set up in a way that aligns with most of the abbreviated reporting requirements for all facilities. So first, the system requires activity data to be reported, usages, and there's a place for emission factors as well. And then after submittal, either the system and or the district calculates the emissions. So the district does not require the facility to calculate emissions themselves. Because of this, no facilities have been set aside as an abbreviated facility in San Diego or preset as one. Now, if a facility believes that they apply to abbreviated reporting, meaning they're one of the sole sectors in the CTR regulation, please email us and we can lift some of the parameter requirements in EIS so that you don't report those parameters for abbreviated reporting.
Question from Haley. For portable engines, is it only engines rated at 50 horsepower or more that will need to be tracked?
Correct.
That's correct.
Okay, Rhonda, your question on MRR was answered in the chat, so we'll move on from that one. Question from Yvette. If stack emissions do not apply, can you enter 0 or select non-applicable?
So for the stack parameters, those were only applied to all point sources in EIS, meaning the district did a full review of all of our calculation methods and are requiring stack parameters for only of those which the requirement exists, meaning any fugitive sources should not include that stack parameter requirement. If you believe that the facility is qualified for abbreviated reporting and doesn't need to report the stack parameters, like I mentioned, please email us and we can lift those requirements. Otherwise, the stack parameter requirements need to be filled in. They're highlighted green in EIS, meaning they are required in order for you to do a QA/QC and submit the report.
So let me just add to that also. Thank you, Jania. Some people may not clearly understand what's the point source or fugitive. So for a combustion device like a boiler engine, it's pretty clear that stack emissions is the stack product the combustions comes out. But like, for example, a degreaser, if it has a hood on top of the degreaser, then anything that is collected into that hood and then vented through a stack, that's called stack emissions. But you may also have fugitive emissions, and that's the emissions that is not collected by the hood. So a piece of equipment could have both stack and fugitive emissions when you're calculating it.
Thank you, Mohsin. I will also put a link in our chat right now. On our website, we have a CTR stack parameter reporting instructions that details how to report the stack information in EIS. And this is located on our calculation procedures on our website.
Thanks, Janya. For everybody in the chat right now, I see some hands that are being raised and then lowered again. Just a reminder, after we go through the chat questions, we will allow you, if you choose, to ask your question orally. So just stand by for that. Another question from Haley. For emergency standby engines, will we be able to edit emission factors based on manufacturer spec sheets, or are those factors set in the system?
So this applies to all sources and all equipment. We have a set of default factors for most sources that have been set in the calculation method, but all facilities can replace those with site-specific or equipment-specific emission factors, either through the data entry direct or the EIQ forms. Please keep in mind that if you replace the default factors with site-specific or equipment-specific, there is an origin drop-down where you will need to select where these emission factors are coming from and then upload the supporting documentation of the emission factors themselves before submittal of the report.
Okay, question from Susan. Susan has 2 permits. One is a chemical conversion tank and another is for a paint booth. Do we have to report everything on site, even though we are not required to have a permit?
So the data request and EIS is set up for permitted equipment and non-permitted equipment. The structure is based off those pieces of equipment which have been permitted. So if those are permitted pieces of equipment, you'll see them in EIS. You'll see the permit description and the devices and materials associated with them. And then the information, the data for those permitted pieces of equipment are required to be reported. For any of the other non-permitted equipment, it depends if they are emitting substances found in the CTR or the EICG of the AB 2588.
Okay, question from someone at Montrose Environmental. Can one RO have multiple FIDs under an EIS account?
Yes, and I believe Mike answered this earlier on how to register for multiple EIF IDs. So I'm not sure if that question was asked after he answered that question. If you still have further questions about how to register for multiple EIF IDs under a single user, either be a general user or an RO, please let us know.
Okay, question here from Myra, I think. Same question for the airport site ID PTOs. I will report, but do I have to report on the contractor's equipment on site? And follow-up question to that, if the PTO is in their name, would this be double counted?
This is a great question. So it depends on the piece of equipment, but in general, we request that the emissions are reported where they take place. And so we do have circumstances where a permit holder is not on site, but the emissions are generated and created there. And so for the most part, where we know this is occurring, the district has set up EIS accounts with those permits under the place that the emissions are occurring. So for example, if a contractor has a lot of different PTOs and they operate at different facilities in San Diego, those PTOs will sit under the specific facilities where the emissions are occurring. If you believe that this isn't accurately represented in what you see in EIS, please let us know, because we do not want to double count emissions like you mentioned.
Question from Chris. How are we supposed to calculate exhaust gas temperature and exhaust gas flow rate?
That's a good question. So we don't have any instructions on our website on how these are supposed to be calculated. If you have equipment available, of course, that gives you these parameters, then those can be included. We have also accepted engineering calculations or equipment specifications if that information is not available. And then I don't know, John, if there's anything in the CTR to elaborate on the stack parameters.
I don't believe we have any guidance on that yet. It is an excellent question, a logical question, because if this is something you haven't reported in the past, you may not have that data available. As Janya said, engineering estimates are acceptable, but we'll make a note of that and try to provide more information in our FAQ document, which we update periodically. But yeah, again, best available data, including engineering estimates, are acceptable.
And it is a snapshot, so it doesn't need to be continuously monitored and changed. But if you measured it once, that's good enough.
Question from Tony. Tony, yes, a copy of the presentation will be up on the website. Question from Craig. Can the district provide phone numbers for staff if we have questions during the data entry process?
Sure. So we recommend that you reach out to apcdinventory@sdapc.org. During the weekday, we will respond within 24 to 48 hours and connect you with a staff. The reason that we haven't assigned principal staff to all of the letters that were sent out, as in previous letters, is because of the numbers of facilities that are reporting this year. So please email the help desk and then we will put you in contact with someone. And if you'd like to talk over the phone, we're available over the phone to discuss that as well.
And that email address, Janya, is in the presentation, so you'll get a copy of it.
Question from Luis. We here at the City of Encinitas have 7 standby facilities, but the EIS only shows 1 under his RO. A follow-up question to that, what is the total number of aggregated diesel engines when reporting on the EIS?
Sure. Okay, so I'll answer the first question. If you believe that there are facilities that are required to report and you didn't receive a letter or you didn't receive a registration email, please contact us, either the district or Lakes, to register for those additional accounts. If you didn't receive a letter, there's a chance that they're not part of phase 1 of CTR. But in this case where you mentioned there the similar equipment and you received 1, I would review the list that we posted here or that's on our website. And if that equipment is listed, please contact us so we can send you a letter and you can register for EIS for those specific facilities or EIF IDs. And I believe the second question was about the portable diesel equipment and aggregation. So there are no limitations on aggregating the portable diesel engines at the moment. The data entry in EIS asks for total fuel usage. Of course, that has to be limited to a engine type if it has a control. And we have instructions on our website about how to report and aggregate the diesel portable diesel emissions under a single site in EIS, and I can post that here as well.
Question from SH. What's the boiler capacity threshold that will be applicable for this?
I can take that one, Janya. For combustion of natural gas or propane, and we do consider LPG to be equivalent to propane, there is a threshold that's actually in phase 3 on the phase-in schedule. But the threshold for natural gas combustion or for propane combustion is 75 million standard cubic feet or 77,000 million BTUs per year. So there is a threshold. We can provide additional information of how that comports with the 4-ton threshold, but that I believe those thresholds are slightly lower. If you want to send an email, we can sort of line those out specifically. But there's the 4-ton threshold for NOx and VOC, but there is also a specific phase 3 threshold for natural gas or propane combustion.
Okay, Beverly, your question, the question and answers will be available later on the recording. Question from Chris, what is the capture efficiency?
So in EIS, both for certain calculation methods, both capture and control is requested. I will put the link online. We have a description in our calculation procedures that gives a description of the capture and the control for specific processes. So the means of capture and control of emissions will change based on the certain source. And so I would recommend looking at the source that you're specifically in question, and there will be a definition in that source for capture and control.
And real quick, again, examples I used earlier, a boiler or a gas turbine or an IC engine, 100% captured because everything goes through a stack. But if you have a hood over a solvent tank, then maybe only 80% of the evaporated hydrocarbons are captured. The rest are lost, fugitive, and not captured. That's the difference.
Okay, question from Myra. Myra, you're welcome. And last week, she emailed login credentials and has not received a login. How long does it take?
I'll let Mike answer this question. So Mike, you're on mute.
If you got an email address, did you get an email for the request from the site itself or from us here at weblakes.com? If you got it from the website after a registration, it may take some time for your responsible official to approve you. But if you'll email us directly, we can look into who needs to do the approval and get it sorted.
Okay. James, yes, the deck will be shared, posted on the website. Beverly, question from Beverly. As a company, they have a 50 horsepower emergency generator. Should they only report those emissions or all chemicals used for the year?
Yes, this is a good question. So all emission inventories have been pre-populated with a place to also report emissions associated with substances found in the appendices of the regulations that we mentioned during the presentation. So although the permitted equipment might be the generator, if you're also emitting or producing one of the substances in those appendices, there's a place in EIS to report those as well, and those should be reported.
Question from Rhonda. Rhonda, I'm not exactly sure what you're asking. She asked, could future events allow printing of the slides? So the slides will be posted on the website. Any comment on that one, Janya?
Yeah, they will be posted on the website. There's a copy of last year's as well.
Okay. So Rhonda, if that didn't answer your question, please post another one in the chat so we can clear that up for you. Beverly asks, is this opening in the portal right now for reporting air emissions in year 2022?
Yes, the portal is currently live, and you can either request login information, or if you have active login information, you can sign in and start reporting 2022 emissions for 2023.
Okay. And Beverly, we answered your question earlier, but some of the CARB staff are also in the chat answering questions, so be sure to check that. John asks, no, his was answered, disregard. Julie asks, based on the Rule 19.3 applicability slide, should we assume that every facility that has a district permit needs to file an emissions inventory for 2022, even if they are not on the district list and not covered per the CTR regulation or the Rule 19.3 applicability requirements? If this is the intention, please identify the rule or regulation where this applicability is outlined.
So to answer your question, the 4 or 5 programs that were outlined in the third slide, which is the Rule 19.3 applicability, like I said, a facility could be applicable to one or more, or none of them. So if you're not applicable to CTR and you're not applicable to any of the other ones listed, then you won't need to report an emissions inventory. But if you do believe that you are applicable to one of the other non-CTR programs, such as the Hotspots program, or if you're over 5 tons per year of NOx or VOC, then you will need to submit an inventory, although that inventory was listed on the letter that was sent out to facilities. So those facilities should have received a data request letter from us citing the other programs.
Okay, Sean, your question was answered in the chat by Daniel, so please take a look at that. John asks, it's called emission inventory. Inventory is what you have on hand, but I'm assuming what this really is how much was emitted. Is that correct?
Correct, yeah. So the emission inventory correlates to the emissions or what was emitted during the reporting year. The one that we're discussing today is reporting year 2022. So the data that's reported should correlate to the emissions for data year 2022.
Okay. From Alexis. The company I work for, Biotech Research and Development Company, is only permitted for an EGEN. Why in the EI questionnaire input are there line items for facility-wide unpermitted solvent usage, PFAS, and additional substances subject to quantification and reporting? Do lab scale chemical use emissions need to be quantified? Is there an exemption for R&D facilities?
Sure. So for CTR specifically, while the applicability is for permitted equipment, there are other requirements for quantifying substances that are unpermitted or equipment that's unpermitted, such as the portable diesel engines, or unpermitted sources or substances such as PFAS is the one that you've mentioned. So since there's a requirement for those to be reported for 2022, although unpermitted, you will see in EIS that these are listed under non-permitted devices. They have been pre-populated in the all facilities for 2022 in EIS.
Okay, thank you. Question from Charles. Beverly, for your question was answered in the chat, so please scroll and take a look at that. Question from Charles. Do the green highlight fields in EIS denote required information?
Yes, they do. So all the green highlighted fields are required. If those are not completed, they will show up in the QA/QC run before submission. So if one is left blank, then you will not be able to submit the report, but all of the green highlighted areas need to be completed.
Okay. This question might be for Mike. There's a couple of discussion points here. Do you know if I need to use a particular browser for full access usability of the site? And then Antonio here posted a screenshot. I'm seeing no button to click continue.
There should be no requirements for any particular browser. Safari, Firefox, Opera, Google, and Edge and are all supported. Legacy browsers like Internet Explorer, which are phased out for security reasons, are no longer supported by us. If you're having specifics, I'll look at the screenshot, and if you can email us at the help desk, we'd be glad to assist you and figure out what's going on.
Okay. Christina asks, I understand this was just discussed, but they have many generators across their agency. Some are permitted above 50 horsepower, but we do have some that are not permitted. Why does the EI questionnaire input screen show the unpermitted diesel engine under 50 horsepower?
It should be above 50 horsepower. We'll confirm that. But for any of the portable diesel engines that are above 40 horsepower, all of the emission inventories have been pre-populated with that. So I'll take a look and make sure it says over. But if you do not have that piece of equipment, in the presentation earlier, I demonstrated where the zero emissions function is. So please use the zero emissions function if you have a piece of equipment that's been assigned to your inventory, which you are not going to be reporting for the data year.
And Janya, just for clarification, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but it is 50 horsepower or greater that are required to be reported. Anything under does not.
That's correct. That's correct, right, John?
For the portables,
Yes.
we have another question in the chat. The CTR category for diesel combustion actually doesn't list a threshold for horsepower. But it lists a very low threshold for hours of operation or fuel use. That's for permitted devices. So if any permitted device that combusts diesel in an internal combustion engine or external combustion, the fuel use and hours of operation thresholds are very low for permitted devices. For the portable engines, there is a 50 horsepower threshold. So if portable engines are used on site, whether they're permitted or not, that's where we have the portable engine reporting requirement. Again, CTR states that requirement for those MRR mandatory reporters for greenhouse gases and the 250-ton facilities, so large facilities.
Jenna asks in the chat, when will a recording of this webinar be released? Jenna, I'm going to try to do that today up to YouTube. It might take a couple more days after that to get it on our website, but it shouldn't be more than that.
Yeah, once we have the YouTube linked in, I think we can get on our website pretty quickly.
Okay. Ramon asks, we're a local manufacturing facility. Will this EIS reporting program replace on-site visits, and in parentheses audits? And follow-up question. Let's take that one first, and then I'll ask his second question.
Sure. So no, the site visits or the inspections are most likely associated with your permits, and that is a different program. This will not replace any compliance or site visits associated with your permits to operate.
Okay, Ramon asks, as an RO, will I be able to grant access to other agents, users, for uploading data requirements?
Yes, as an RO, you'll see two buttons next to the user that's requested it, and you can deny or accept their request. Mike, I'm not sure if you have anything to add to that.
Nope, that's right. If they go to the front page of the portal and choose the request access, enter their email and the EIF ID of your facility, you will get a notice as the RO to approve or deny the user. And when you sign in, you'll see the two links, as Jonia mentioned, and you'll be able to grant access to other people. With this morning's access, there's also a ability to upgrade other people in your organization to be an RO. If, for example, you need to go on medical leave or some other reason you're out of the office and you want to designate an alternate. So both of those can be done from the start page.
Lori asks, can she add a bunch of sites under herself as an RO, up to 20 of them?
So Yes, although there's probably some naming here that we should be clear on. So sites are related to district sites, and all sites should be under a single facility, but you can have multiple facilities under a single user login. Under one facility, most of the facilities in San Diego have 1 or 2 sites associated with them. Some have much more than that. But if you're looking to have multiple facilities under your login, that is something that we can do, and which Mike went over earlier.
John asks, there's a lot of information about equipment specifically, but what if they have emissions from a manual operation, so no equipment is involved?
I'm assuming this equipment is permitted, so it isn't dependent on the equipment type necessarily, but the emissions from the process itself. So if you have potentially a manual operation that is producing fugitive emissions and it's permitted, it still needs to be reported.
Okay, David asks, I'm not completely sure what's being asked. What's that list you posted only for phase 1 or both?
Yes, only phase 1. So only those that were required to send data for data year 2022, reported in 2023, which is phase 1.
Okay. Dave asks, what's the difference between CTR and TEI CTR in the list provided?
So this is an example of a facility that has 2 reporting programs associated with it. So TEI CTR is what you've probably saw in a header of a letter. That means that inventory is a toxic emission inventory, meaning it will have emissions and risk associated with AB 2588 hotspots program calculated for it, as well as being part of the CTR, the criteria toxics rule.
Christina asks, a site has been added to my account that I am not associated with. How does she get it removed from her list?
Yes, please email us at apcdinventory@sdapc.org, and we'll review that permit. And if it's not associated with your facility, we will remove it for you.
Okay. So in the chat, Haley posted some information in the chat. Steve asks, would a 200 kilowatt and 80 kilowatt emergency backup diesel generator be considered portable diesel fired?
So without knowing the specifics, I would assume that these are permitted. And so if they are a stationary source, and we have our definitions of stationary versus portable, if it's a stationary source, then it wouldn't be qualified as a portable piece of equipment.
Okay, Diane, your question was answered further down in the chat. And let's see, we have a question from Haley. That question was answered, Haley. Wendy asks, can an Excel spreadsheet be uploaded for one facility with tabs for different types of equipment?
So the spreadsheets have been pre-rendered and pre-populated. So the tabs that are already there are the ones that will need to be uploaded back into the system. Any tabs or sheets added to the EIQ forms after they've been pre-rendered will result in them not uploading correctly. Any changes that you'd like to make to the inventory, please make it in the data entry direct and not the EIQ Excel spreadsheets.
John asks, where on our website will the slides be posted?
I can send a link in the chat. We have a webpage for the emissions inventory system. That's where it will be posted.
Okay. Roger asks, are there any exemptions for certain businesses, types or sizes, such as biotech, R&D, for emissions beyond EDG and industrial hot water boilers?
I believe you're referring to exceptions for CTR. So, John, is this something that you'd like to
There are a couple of exceptions that I should mention. There's really no default exemptions for a complete exemption for a certain business type or a certain business size. It's all based on basically the equipment thresholds. However, having said that, for the diesel engine category, I'll scroll down. I have a copy of the regulation open here. For the diesel engine category, agricultural facilities and medical facilities have the option of delaying reporting until phase 3, I believe. Daniel or Owen, correct me if I'm wrong. So, for example, if a hospital's only permitted process is a diesel backup generator, they are not required by CTR to report in phase 1. They can wait until phase 3. However, to answer your question, is regarding R&D or hot water boilers or small, engines. It's what the thresholds are in the regulation. Regarding VOCs and solvents, again, CTR is specifies emissions of those solvents, degreasing materials, and so forth from permitted processes. However, the district's implementation of the hotspots rule, as Janya has mentioned, requires, basically requires reporting of those substances so they can be evaluated. So if it's if you're using, bulk, solvent for sanitation or something like that, and it's not a permitted process, then if the chemicals are on the chemical list, then those do need to be included.
Question from Dave. For construction companies with several permitted portable pieces of equipment that are used across the county, but with only one facility or home office, is there a way to provide emission location information for each portable unit?
Yeah, this is a great question. I think we mentioned this a little bit earlier about reporting contractor equipment, including portable diesel engines or portable equipment under the facility in which the emissions took place. So we have examples of other permitted pieces of equipment that sit at or are rented at a certain facility, and that facility is to inventory those in their facility in EIS. If you have a portable piece of equipment like this, it depends on the size, of course, but the facility itself should report this as part of their portable equipment or portable diesel engines, assuming it's a portable diesel engine. If not, it still would be required to report under the facility where the emissions are taking place.
Steve asks, what category do emergency generators fall under?
Yeah, I can take that one, Janya. It's in the regulation in table A3 of the CTR. It's sector number 8. Includes combustion of crude, residual, distillate, or diesel oil. Again, except for agricultural operations or medical related industry sectors. So that's the category that includes the backup generators that are powered by diesel.
Julie asks, when we upload populated EIQ forms, will it overwrite existing data in the EIS system for that source?
Sure. So existing data, meaning it comes from a previous reporting year and it's been rolled over, will exist in the EIQ forms that have been pre-rendered. Data that's been entered into Data Entry to Direct will be overwritten if an EIQ form is uploaded after that data was entered. So that's why it's recommended to upload your forms and then adjust in Data Entry Direct after, because it will overwrite.
Okay, there's for Haley and Diane, there's some more information from CARB staff in the chat for your questions. Okay, Steve, I believe your question about aggregating the generators has been answered. Raymond asks, he did air samples for VOC in the lab and found non-detect. Will that IH report suffice to not report?
It depends on the equipment and the substances at the facility. So I would recommend that you email us so we can discuss your specific equipment and the specific substances you might have. Because most of the time the criterion and toxics rule, or CTR, is not looking at just criteria emissions. We're also looking at toxics. So if you email us, we can go over the equipment that you have and determine if that is enough for exemption.
Dave asks, does this CTR program collect usage data for the CARB doors equipment?
No, it doesn't collect any mobile emissions. Or the intent of CTR is not to collect emissions from mobile sources, and I think that's what the doors system collects. So
yes,
there has been some discussion of including on-site mobile emissions under CTR. That's not included in the CTR. That was discussed during development of the CTR, and there are still discussions happening regarding potential future updates to CTR that would include some categories of on-site mobile, like distribution warehouses or refrigerated warehouses where there's a lot of truck traffic. But currently, CTR does not cover any on-road or off-road mobile sources like trucks and forklifts and so forth.
Charles asks, in the case of our fire stations with emergency generators, would we need to report fluorotelmer usage if the firefighting foam was used off-site?
Yeah, this is a great question. So while there is a PFAS requirement for certain PFAS, not all PFAS, starting in 2022, please review those CAS numbers that we have listed in EIS if you're wondering if it's those that should report. But the one that's listed here is the one. So EPA is currently in development of some guidance for PFAS, including calculation methods. We currently don't have a calculation method for PFAS, but knowing that this information needed to be required for potential toxic emission inventories, it is listed. And so we have data requirements that you'll see there, the usage and type. So right now the guidance is in line with all of the other sources that we require to report, meaning that if the emission existed at the facility that is permitted and in EIS, then please report that usage and don't report the usage associated with off-site usage of equipment, or in this case, substance.
Okay, Chris asks, is it safe to say that if the diesel generator we have is equipped with a stack, the capture efficiency is 100%?
Correct. And I think this is what Mohsen was mentioning earlier, as that depending on the source, but specifically for combustion engines, your capture is going to be 100%. Your control might be different, right? It depends on the control that you have on that. If you have an aftermarket piece of equipment to help control those emissions, that could differ and is not 100%, of course, but 100% of them are going through the stack, so they are 100% captured.
Okay, Haley, your question about contractor portable engines and aggregating the emissions, the answer is there in the chat?
I don't know if it is, but this is a good question too. So the calculation method that is currently assigned to the portable diesel engines in EIS is for any engines between 50 to 600 horsepower, and the default emission factors are for those size of engines. So you can aggregate, if you wanted to use default emission factors, you can aggregate any engines from contractors under that size. If you do like to use specific emission factors, then they can't be aggregated and they'll need to be broken out by the type of emission factor that you're reporting. And so it's not based on runtime, it's field consumption. That's why we can aggregate under a certain horsepower range.
Alicia asks, this is to John and Carb, can you confirm that wastewater agencies also have a delay/extension on reporting new toxics due to the industry-wide study being coordinated by the California Association of Sanitation Agencies?
Yes, excellent question. And we're going to add this to our FAQ document. To answer your question specifically, I can confirm that wastewater agencies definitely had a delay or an extension, at least from CARB's perspective, on reporting the new toxics that have been added to the list. And there are conversations underway on how to do source tests for the new toxic chemicals at waste management facilities, including landfills and wastewater treatment. So there will be wastewater treatment facilities that need to report either under the core criteria or under phase 1, but we do not expect those facilities to report the new chemicals that are emitted from the waste treatment activity itself. So, for example, we suspect that there may be PFAS compounds or other solvents that have been added to the list that could be emitted from wastewater treatment. But we don't know which compounds or the amounts and emission rates of those chemical substances from wastewater treatment. So the use of existing methodologies and existing pollutants and emission factors for the treatment processes can be used. A car will not consider it out of compliance if the new substances are not emitted. So we'll have some additional information in our FAQ about that.
Darnell asks 2 questions regarding assistance. And the first is, will there be a webinar to assist in correctly populating the fields in the questionnaire on the site?
Sure. So the webinar in March will be much more detailed about the use of EIS, including populating fields and the QA/QC of the report. But as you can imagine, we have many different sources and calculators in EIS. I think we have over 200 calculators in EIS, so we won't be able to go over every calculator. We do have a lot of information on our website. So on our calculation procedures website, we have detailed instructions for every calculator on what parameters being asked and what should be reported. In the next couple days, we will also be publishing a step-by-step guide to the use of EIS. Again, that's not calculator specific, but that will be on our website this week.
And in case you joined late, the March webinar is on March 7th at 2 p.m.
Okay, and Darnell's second question is, how can he get one-on-one assistance if he needs it?
Sure. So if you need assistance, please contact the district at apcdinventory@sdapc.org. If you have specific questions, we'll be able to answer those in the email. If you'd like to talk to somebody over the phone, please let us know as well. As you can imagine, we have 2,300 letters that we sent out this year. And so while we would like to give hands-on assistance to everybody, we will try to answer all of the questions that you have, but we might not be able to speak over the phone. The best way to get in contact and get your emails, your email questions answered is going to be to contact the help desk.
Okay, Brooke asks, will restaurant kitchen cooking systems in our building that are tenant operated be something that will need to be included by us, or will the tenant be receiving a request for this?
So the requests that were sent out were directed to the individuals who are listed on the permits to operate. And those are the individuals who are required to use EIS and submit the data.
Patty asks, where can we have access to the calculations with the data we uploaded last year?
So for 2021, most of those draft reports have been sent out. For some of the larger facilities, they have not. If you'd like to request that data and you don't have the report that was sent to you, please email us and we can get you a copy of that report.
Valentine asks, I have 2 sites, but only one is shown in EIS. Why is that?
I think we kind of answered this before, but if there was opposite, if there's a site that shouldn't be there, please let us know. If you have a site that is not listed, please also let us know. So all users can add devices and materials in EIS, but you cannot edit the permits. So if you have a permitted piece of equipment that's not listed, please let us know and we can add it to your facility.
Okay, John, your question about CTR, TEI is answered in the chat. Christina asks, can you please remind us again of the due dates? She believes you had a slide that also showed a visual of the due dates.
Sure, and I can go back for that. So bear with me as I go through the slides. So the due dates are 60 days from the date on the letter, unless you received a letter dated before the portal launched on February 6th. If that's the case, then it's 60 days from February 6th, which we've calculated to be April 7th, 2023.
Okay, and Christina, your second question about the email, it's on the screen right now, APCD inventory there at the bottom. Frank asks, does CARB expect to require health risk assessments beyond what is already addressed via AB 2588 stipulations?
I'll answer that. I believe the answer to the question is no. I'm not the expert on this. There's a separate section here at CARB that manages the 2588 program at the CARB level. Almost all of the 2588 program is implemented at the district level, and is the district uses that emissions inventory criteria and guidelines document, which is put out by CARB, which was updated. But the implementation takes place at the district level. So to my knowledge, there are no HRA assessment requirements other than what the district determines to be necessary.
Yeah, John, that is correct. That is correct. So the answer is no.
Okay.
Julie asks, how do we get emission factors and or methodologies permanently changed in the EIS system?
Sure. So I think this is probably a 2-part question: emission factors and then the methodologies. So site-specific, equipment-specific emission factors are allowed to be input and EIS at any time. You can overwrite the default values and then, of course, upload the supporting documentation, like I mentioned earlier. For the methods, if a facility would like to propose a new calculation method that differs from the district's standard method, will require adequate supporting documentation, and that needs to be submitted to the district before May 1st of the reporting year, so that we have adequate time to review that with the emission inventory before submitting the emissions. So you can upload that documentation to EIS with the report, or you can email us at APCD inventory.
Haley asks, non-road portable diesel engines required to be reported from contractor use. Does that include things like bulldozers, excavators, backhoes, and other off-highway construction trucks?
CARB considers those to be off-road mobile sources, and CARB does estimate emissions from off-road mobile engines using other sources of information. So they're not required under CTR. So there is a definition in the CTR regulation for portable engines, but anything that can move basically under its own power. It's not, portable is considered more like on skids, or it doesn't have its own motility per se. So those other sources are not covered under CTR.
Montrose Environmental asks, to clarify, if a client received a letter dated January 24th, 2023, the report will be due 60 days from February 6th, which would be April 6th. So I think this is a question about due dates.
Yes, correct. That's because the district will give a facility 60 days to report their data. And since the EIS portal was not available when you received that letter, it's 60 days from when the portal launched. So that's correct. The due date that you have there is correct.
Question from Caitlin. If supporting documentation was submitted in previous years for emission factors, such as SDSs or fuel analysis, etc., do we need to upload those again in EIS yearly, or will the district use that previously provided data?
So since this is the final year of our phase-in for Rule 19.3 to require electronic reporting, those SDSs and full analysis need to be submitted. Once submitted into EIS, EIS will be the electronic record, and they will stay there for future reporting years. We do have records of what was reported in the past, but that only goes back a certain number of years. So I would not assume that the district has that information, either because the inventory might have been quite a long time ago and we don't have it, or our records retention doesn't require us to have it that long. So if it's for this reporting year and it affects the reporting year emissions, please upload that information.
Okay, thank you. So that concludes our questions in the chat. So we do have a couple of raised hands. Michelle, could you allow Robert to speak?
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that. Robert, your mic is allowed to speak. Can you unmute yourself? Robert?
I think Robert dropped his hand.
Yeah. Oh, I took it down when I unmuted him.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Should I move on to the next person?
Yes, please.
Okay. Tyree, can you go ahead and turn on your mic?
I have a question about an R&D facility that's phase 1 because they have multiple generators. That facility has 4 generators, 4 boilers, 4 permitted boilers, and 28 small boilers, which are below 200 million BTU. So the first question will be, do we aggregate the 28 non-permitted boilers? And the other question will be also for that facility, they have multiple fume hoods and they use thousands of chemicals. And part of these chemicals might be listed. So, but while the fume hoods are not permitted, do we have to go through each and every chemical and figure if they're part of the chemical list? And in that situation, it's going to be very difficult for us to do a mass balance for all these chemicals. What should we do in such situations?
Sure. So the first part about the boilers, for reporting equipment under unpermitted, the guidance is to report at the device level. If you have reason to believe that they can be aggregated correctly, meaning they have the same emission factor, all of the parameters are the same, there is no limit to that, especially for the unpermitted pieces of equipment. Permitted cannot be aggregated. But for unpermitted, if all of the information is the same for the boiler, the size, the emission factors, all of that, potentially you can aggregate. Please include a note in the inventory that it was aggregated though. There's a notes section at the bottom of EIS where you can let us know that you've aggregated equipment. And then for reporting toxics, like you had mentioned, so for AB 2588, we have to calculate risk associated with these toxic emissions. If they are not reported individually, what we, in order to calculate risk, we will have to make conservative assumptions, meaning that the pollutant with the highest risk may be assumed for the usage of all of the substances that are being reported. So it is recommended as much as possible to report specific usage with specific substances so that the risk is calculated correctly.
Okay, the mass balance is going to be a bit difficult because the fume hoods are used to just transfer chemicals from one container to another. And so maybe a little amount of VOCs will be emitted. How should we go about creating a mass balance for the amounts that have been emitted to the air through the hoods?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I have a little.
I think this is a specific type of a question, and I think it'll be helpful to take this offline and help the gentleman on how to calculate it. But if you have a short answer, go ahead.
No, I had a very general answer, which is that you can apply the controls associated with the fume hoods to that calculation. But yeah, if you have specific questions about specific equipment that is at your facility, please email us.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and mute you now. I have one more hand. Andrea, I'm gonna go ahead and allow your mic if you can unmute yourself. Andrea, are you there?
Can you hear me now?
Yes, I hear you.
Okay, thank you. It's kind of a follow-up question to that. If you are requiring facilities to report potentially toxic emissions from all unpermitted sources, are you going to be providing some type of threshold category similar to how the South Coast says if you use a certain amount of materials, you do need to provide emissions for that? Or are you just saying any amount needs to be provided?
Yeah, so no, this is a good question. So we are different from South Coast in that we haven't set that threshold. But if we have predetermined that the facility is a toxic emission inventory, meaning TEI, and they need to report emissions associated with the Appendix A of the EICG, that means they've met the threshold of that regulation, and we are requiring them to report toxics for that. If it is not TEI, and then you have a question about relating toxics for CTR, please email us specifically, and we can look into the toxics that you're referring to.
Okay, thank you. So the facility should just confirm in their letter under which reporting program the district has pulled them in and follow up accordingly.
Correct. And this, of course, has nuances. It changes for facilities that are reporting for the first time versus those that have been in the programs before, because the reporting thresholds are based on actual emissions. So I would definitely recommend to email us and give us the specifics of the facility, and then we can give you a more accurate answer to that facility.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to go ahead and disable your mic. We have one more hand. Neil, I went ahead and allowed your mic if you can unmute yourself.
Good morning. I have a question, I think largely maybe on the minds of large facilities with a lot of data they'll be populating this year. And maybe this is better addressed on March 7th. How do responsible managers, ROs, what are they attesting to if the tool is not responding with what the emissions are associated with all the data they're loading? It could raise questions about data quality, errors in populating data. And again, at the end of the day, a manager is going to want to know, what am I attesting to in terms of emissions? Do you have any advice on how facilities can use the tool to check that everything's been transcripted or populated correctly? And is there any way to validate the inventory preliminarily before they submit and certify?
Yeah, also a great question. So Rule 19.3 has language where we don't require a facility at this point to attest to the accuracy of the emissions, only of the accuracy of the data that they are reporting at that time. Currently, EIS does not have the capabilities to give us real-time emissions at the time of submittal. So there's a way to check that. This is something that we're working towards, and in future years, we hope to have that. But when an RO submits, they're not attesting to the accuracy of the emissions, only the data that was submitted. If there are concerns with that, please email us and we can discuss that offline.
Thanks.
Okay. I don't have any more hands raised.
Janya, we have one more in the chat from Lori. I believe your question was answered in the chat. We have another one from Jess. We received our emissions inventory request letter with a date of January 18, 2022.
Yes. So thanks, Jess. Correction letter was sent out in the last 2 weeks. Depending on how quick the post service is, you may or may not have received it. Because of that error in that first batch that was sent out, the letters have been adjusted to more recent dates. So the letter has been, the date has been extended, and now it correctly refers to 2023.
Okay, another question from John in the chat. We were notified by APCD that we will need a permit for a welding process that was not previously permitted. Do I need to report those emissions as an estimate?
Sure. So I won't speak to the permitting piece, but in order to quantify the emissions, yes, emissions associated with welding should be reported. We have calculators set up, and until it is permitted, please put it under the unpermitted devices. But as you mentioned, the district is currently in the process of permitting, and there will be a permit associated with those welding processes soon.
Great. Okay, that's it for the chat.
Right. Well, I wanted to thank you everybody again for attending the webinar and look forward to seeing you again on March 7th. And see if anybody else has any closing remarks.
Nope, sounds good. Thank you, everybody, for joining today. I would recommend that if you would like updates, we have a subscription service on our website. And if you check to get emission inventory updates, then you will get emails when we have new information posted to our website, including this presentation.
Have a nice day, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.